Sydney studios, where we're joined by the Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Barry.
Let's just start with this. As it stands at the moment, 7% of negative gearing applies to new homes. So, in effect, you're wiping out almost all of the negative gearing investment.
Now, what we're doing, Barry, is saying if you want to grow your wealth through negative gearing, if you aspire to do that, we embrace that. But all we ask is that you work with us to ensure that we can build the housing supply. The answer to housing affordability, which is at crisis levels, is to have more houses and apartments being built. Now, the proponents of the current arrangements say negative gearing increases housing supply. It doesn't. It's a falsehood. 93% goes into existing properties. And that means, in effect, if that's your policy objective, you've got a failure rate of 93%. So we want to see negative gearing continue, but we want to put it to work for the economy to create jobs, 25,000 construction jobs a year, but even more importantly than that, to be creating new supply. And we'd work with states and territories to ensure that new supply comes on board to meet the increased activity which would result from our policy.
Well, let's look at some of the impacts then, and first of all on rents. Now, the housing industry, and they're not alone, some economists have been saying this, they've been warning for a long time that it will lead to increased rents, and it makes sense in this sense, I suppose, because landlords, if they can access negative gearing, then they'll accept lower rents.
Well, Barry, that's a complete fallacy based on a complete misunderstanding of what happened in the 1980s. You'll hear this myth that when negative gearing was abolished in the 1980s, rents went up. That's a fallacy. They went down in many capital cities. They stayed the same in others. They only went up in Sydney and Perth for reasons completely unrelated to the negative gearing policy. Now, in relation to the impact of this policy, of course, we want to grow the housing supply. That is the best answer for housing affordability both at rental and purchasing level, and we have grandfathered every existing investor, so there is no incentive for them to leave the market. And even if some did, even if some landlords sold their properties, as the Grattan Institute has pointed out, one less landlord means one less renter as renters move into the home ownership category.
Well, the Housing Industry Association says that 78% of those that use negative gearing now on rental properties earn less than $100,000. They're your mum and dad investors, so you'll be hurting the middle income earners. That's their argument.
Now, well, again, 2 points, Barry, fallacies. 2 points. Firstly, people will be able to continue to negatively gear. We just invite people after 2017 to work with us and buy new houses and apartments to build supply. And secondly, we know that half the benefit of negative gearing goes to the top 20% of income earners. The idea that somehow it's cleaners and nurses who are getting the huge benefit out of negative gearing is just not right. Of course, many people do it right up and down the income scale, but the vast bulk of the benefit goes to high income earners. Now, we want to see negative gearing remain, but we want to put it to work.
But that's fine for middle-income earners now who are already into negative gearing, but it locks it out for the next generation.
No, that's not right, Barry, because you find new houses and apartments right up and down the price scale. You see, sure, expensive houses being built. You see affordable houses being built. People can invest in apartments, which are obviously usually much cheaper than houses, so it will still be available. And what we want to do is see new housing stock come on. This is a big, bold policy reform which puts first home buyers on a more level playing field. At the moment, first home buyers turn up at an auction with very little government support. People buying their second, third and 10th home have negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount, which combine to be the most generous tax incentives for property investment in the world. And when you've got the sort of budget pressures we have, when you've got the housing affordability crisis we have, that's not fair, it's not sustainable. The capital gains tax is one of the fastest growing concessions in the federal budget. We're the only party with a policy to get it under control.
Is there a risk now, though, that people will rush out and buy established homes before July 2017? That could lead to a bubble, and then the bubble will pop after 2017.
Well, Barry, obviously we considered in our policy development, we've been working on this now for 12 months. It was around this time last year I first flagged that this would be on Labor's policy agenda. We've looked at all sorts of options. Now, of course, we could have announced a retrospective tax. We could have announced it's effective from today or from election day. Both Bill Shorten and I have a strong view against retrospective taxes. We're giving plenty of lead time to allow the market to respond, plenty of lead time for people to think about the implications for their own personal circumstances, plenty of lead time for the supply to adjust, for property developers to think about the increase in demand for new stock. That's the right thing to do. Now, of course, There'll be changes in investment activity for all sorts of reasons, not least of which tax, but the general property market, the general economy. But we're flagging our intentions very early, very clearly, so that they can be taken into account in a proper way. And of course, so that the Australian people can vote on competing plans at the next election. So far, we're the only side turning up at the election with any plans.
But still, you do accept that there could be a rush for existing homes and that could create a bubble?
No, well, the word bubble was first used by the Secretary of the Treasury about current settings. What I'm pointing out is that people will obviously be able to continue to invest in existing homes after the 1st of July 2017. They'll be able to continue to invest in those for rental purposes. But if they want to claim the losses on their property against their salary, then they'll need to invest in new houses. I think that will lead to an increase in supply of new houses and apartments. That makes sense. That's sensible. I think people will continue to make investment decisions based on the fundamentals. Of course, tax will just be one of their considerations.
They will make investment decisions, but isn't it riskier to invest in a new home rather than an established one?
No, I don't think so, Barry. There's an ABS definition of a new home. It's one that's been built in the last 12 months and where the taker out of the loan is the first owner of the property after the developer. That's not in any sense any more risky than buying an existing property. There's an element of risk to any investment. Some people think that property never goes down. Of course, sometimes it does, but that applies to existing properties as well as new.
Now, Scott Morrison, in the column that Catherine referred to, under the headline, "It's a silly idea," one of the criticisms he makes of it is that there's not really a lot of revenue, not in the first 4 years anyway. You talk 30 billion over 10 years, but he points out 600 million over the first 4 years.
Yeah, well, a couple of points, Barry. Firstly, we look for structural saves over the long term, which do take a while to build up, but the budget needs long-term repair. And so this is a change which doesn't have a huge impact in the first 4 years. We want it to build up. That's just what the budget needs. The reason for that is because we have grandfathered everything. Now, Scott Morrison, in his consideration, is not going to grandfather. If he's going to get much bigger returns to the budget in the first 4 years by whacking into existing investments, he should say so. He should rule out doing that because that's the very clear implication of his criticism. But I almost feel sorry for Scott Morrison this week. He's had a shocker. He's had the GST taken away from him by the Prime Minister. He's had his best mate, Stuart Roberts, sacked against his wishes. And now he's reduced to a pathetic response in the papers saying this is a bad idea, but I'll think about it.
And he will think about it. He says he's keeping an open mind on the issue as he prepares the budget. Do you think in the end they'll go down a similar track?
Well, they'll be all over the place, just as on high-income super. When we announced a high-income super policy last April, Scott Morrison led the charge against it, said it was an outrageous attack on the retirement incomes of Australians. He wouldn't stand for it. He'd be the last man at the barricades defending super. Now he's going to do that as well. I mean, this is the problem for you as commentators, Barry. Frankly, when you've got a Treasurer who has no economic framework, who doesn't stand for anything, it's very difficult to predict what he will do because he will condemn us for a policy one day and then within the year adopt that policy or go further. All I can do with Bill Shorten is lead the debate. That's what we've been doing. High-income super, multinational tax, tobacco, emissions reduction fund, opposing them on the baby bonus, and yesterday's very significant announcement, the biggest economic policy announcement from an opposition in a generation. I think that shows we are prepared to go to the election with a big, bold policy agenda, and Scott Morrison and Malcolm Turnbull are engaged in an ever-lengthening talk fest where they fail to come up with any costed, detailed plans.
And part of yesterday, of course, and just briefly, running out of time, but was on capital gains concessions, and those concessions are there to encourage investment. Have you just reduced that incentive to invest by half?
Well, what we've done is look very carefully both at its fairness and sustainability. Now, look at the Murray inquiry into financial systems. That recommended reviewing these concessions with a view to reducing them because they were very worried about the impact on financial stability of over-investment in some sectors of the economy. Any sensible or prudent government or opposition will look at that very carefully. That's what we've done. Secondly, it's not fair. 70% of the benefit of the capital gains tax discount goes to the top 10% of income earners, Barry. I'll say that again. 70% of the benefit goes to the top 10% of income earners. It's not fair, it's not sustainable, and as David Murray pointed out in his review, it's risky.